Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts on this sort of sketchy, sunny day. They're saying it's a lot warmer than it feels out here, but at least it's nice. Have to take advantage of these global warming days when you can. So, dinosaurs. Let's talk about dinosaurs. So, dinosaurs is kind of like talking about Jesus Christ. When you have had it pounded into your soul for so long and all of your relatives and friends and family believe it's real, how dare you ever have the thought that it couldn't be, that it could be a big lie and it has an ulterior motive. But that indeed is probably what has occurred. You see, dinosaurs, there's a bunch of ways to go about looking at this, okay? But the easiest way that you can look at this is before you have anyone try to prove to you that they may not have existed by current day, museums and techniques that paleontologists are having problems with, trying to find the real bones, trying to be able to see the real bones that are locked behind these vault doors and all this other stuff. Before 1842, when the Royal Society in England had prophesied that these things exist because they were evolutionists and they needed some more ironclad evidence to destroy God, to destroy any theory of creation that was outside of their paradigm. And hey, I'm not necessarily a creationist. I'm not sure what I am. I see some logic in potentially evolution, and I see a whole bunch of logic in creationism / alien engineering. Again, could be a poof, you exist, could be, hey, we're going to let these guys go first, and they're going to hybrid this stuff together, and we got kind of a Prometheus thing. So I'm kind of still out on the jury. But I will tell you this. Man has excavated into the ground since man could excavate into the ground. We have built pyramids on every continent on this planet. We have excavated billions of metric tons of soil from this planet's surface. And up until these evolutionists, these Darwinists, Darwin was a fucking hack to begin with, and because he stole his material from De Lamarck, didn't have the IQ to completely understand De Lamarck, and so he chops it down to something we all understood, which is survival of the fittest. Seriously, do you consider yourself a genius for figuring out what every human being on the surface of the planet understood, whether they be 3 years old or 300 years old? They knew that survival of the fittest is the way it works because someone bigger than them took something away once. That's it. As soon as a big kid comes up to you and goes, mine, and then, I want this, fuck you, you know that survival of the fittest is the way it works, because until you get bigger than that kid, you're not going to be able to get that thing back. So Darwin is a genius. Well, the hummingbirds are going nuts. That clicking noise, that's what hummingbirds are. But in all of this earth moving, we never found a dinosaur bone. And I mean ever found anything like a dinosaur bone. Oh, we found bones, and we worship those bones because you remember that, your average tribe in anywhere, even if you want to think you're superior because you're white, we had bone necklaces around us and all kinds of stuff. This was standard, divided, well, it's not even divided, it's just standard conquest paraphernalia. If you killed a big black bear up in Russia, well, then you deserve a little accolade. And if you can pull its teeth out, pull its claws out, cut its hands off, cut its head off, save the fur, and put it above your throne in your tribe, oh, people are going to go, what's that? And they go, hey, he killed that thing. Oh my God, I'm not messing with that guy. So glad he's in charge of the tribe. But in 1842, the Royal Society theorized this. Maybe we had an old, just imagine the imagination of these fucking guys. No proof at all. No proof at all. They came up with this fictitious theory of a mammoth, large beast, prehistoric creature. I mean, that's just bizarre, right? That'd be like me saying, yeah, I'm just thinking about maybe there's some gray aliens. Probably were some gray aliens. And then all of a sudden, I find these 4-foot tall gray aliens with big almond-eyed dudes. And I find them 12 years after I write a paper that they probably exist. And the guy that finds them is a buddy of mine or a student of mine or the same type of scholar as I am. And so we're both evolutionists. We're both Darwinists. We want to have our new theory, which is a business, become popular so we can charge money, we can transform the consciousness of man. Now, one of the big precursors before we get into this is that, this is to get rid of the belief in God. Yeah, probably is an evolutionist. It's one of these things where they want to have more juice than God, right? And so their whole thing is, how do we turn off God and turn on us? It doesn't really mean that God doesn't exist or that they even believe that, but they just want to have more juice. They want to turn it into a business. Now, what I don't understand is that this is going to be a little digression based on this, because we're not going to cover or insinuate this any further than this little statement here. But the Jesuits keep getting pulled into all this flat earth stuff, and the Jesuits are always trying to get you to not believe in God and to believe in man, like as the only thing that exists. And on one level, what if they understand that the story of Christ is completely fictitious, that all these virgin birth gods are all copycats of each other, and that there really has been no divine intervention in a way that has been blatant and like a cartoon where God's down there and there's Adam and Eve. They understand that never happened, and so maybe their whole thing is to say, we need to progress by getting rid of these folklore stories and start believing in ourselves, because we are truly responsible for ourselves. And the idea was, hey, you want to know why your government sucks? Because you're believing in this magic person in the sky, and I'm not saying God, but like Jesus and whomever, Allah, Buddha, all these other things, instead of paying attention to what's going here on Earth. So while you're messing around, of course the evil forces, the secular evil forces, can take over and destroy this planet, because you're not even paying attention. You're dreaming about heaven. You're dreaming about being, as soon as you die, everything's going to be fine, instead of worrying about the planet. So maybe that's their tactic. Who knows? So back to our dinosaur story. So it's 1842. This theory is put forth that a giant race of creatures could have existed in the past. I mean, again, it's like a comic book. It's just out of thin air. But this thing incubates for 12 years. Until this dude, who's part of the same group, okay? I think he's in a river in upstate Missouri, and he finds a tooth. All right. It's a pretty big tooth. He finds a tooth, and what does he do? He crafts an entire dinosaur around this tooth. I mean, when you saw, let's put it this way. For any of you that have seen the Star Trek episodes in the 90s, perhaps this happened in the Enterprise, which is 2001 or 2005. But there have been various stages and various stories inside Star Trek where they'll have a tiny piece of DNA, and they take it to the holodeck, and they have this amazing computer that is a billion, trillion, quadrillion times more powerful than any computer we have here on Earth in 2019. And it understands all the protein pattern folding, cause and effect to the nucleic acids of DNA, RNA, and it constructs up the creature from a tiny tissue sample. You can know what it looks like. I think they only did this really one time. Apparently, in the 1800s, this technology was also in existence, but it just happened to be in the head of some fraudsters. The next thing they found was a big giant femur bone. Probably a woolly mammoth bone, if it even was real. And these bones, well, they go on display back in the old days. But today, according to the paleontologists that are trying to see these things, they are told that all of these bones are behind big locked vaults and they don't have permission to see them yet. But some of these guys have been in the business for like 35 years and they're like, how many years do I have to be in this business before I become the elite privileged to see the real bones? I mean, I don't even need to touch them. I just need to see them. But there's this era I've heard it in two different years. Recently I re-looked this up, and I guess it's from 1870 to 1890, a 10-year period between Edward Cope and I think it's like a Reginald Marsh, Mr. Marsh and Mr. Cope going after it. So these guys, one of them discovers like 80 different dinosaurs, the other one discovers 56 different dinosaurs. But even modern-day paleontologists will say, oh, well, that's a real shame that those two guys got involved with fraudulent, deceptive tactics. Because out of, what is that? That's 136 different dinosaurs between the two of them that they supposedly discovered. I mean, these are the inceptual paleontologists that launched this. This is very much like the Catholic Church, formerly being Roman senators. All of a sudden every senator becomes a pope, then as they die off they become saints until we only have one pope. And then of course this doesn't even start until 350 AD, but then this Inquisition comes around, they pound it into everyone's soul. This is true, right? You got a dagger pointed at your throat. Of course it's totally true, sir, don't kill me and my kid. Great, now we have a bunch of denominations of the Catholic Church, and of course those are real and this is fake. It just gets crazy. So paleontology started off being a completely fraudulent sector of science based on a theory that incubated for 12 years with lots of hype in all the newspapers and publications. All of a sudden, boom, they start finding dinosaurs. Of course, they find a tooth, they make a dinosaur, whatever. They find a femur bone, they make a dinosaur out of it. And what's absolutely amazing is those little dinosaurs, big dinosaurs, they're still in the history books as having looked just like that. So imagine you've never seen a human being before, and you find a tooth somewhere sitting around, and someone theorizes that we existed. Of course, we actually did exist, so this is not a very good analogy. But then they make a human being, and then they actually find a human being several hundred years later, and it happens to be exactly like the 99.9% complete fabrication that they made 100 years earlier. Welcome to paleontology. But out of the 136 that these two guys supposedly came up with, Cope and Marsh, only 32 in modern day history are given the certification of being real. Probably none of them are real. But now wait a minute. You have grown up your whole life watching television shows, movies, you've read books, you've seen bones in the museums, you've seen daily reports of finding new dinosaurs, and my God, you've seen photographs of the paleontologists digging these things out of the ground. I mean, you've seen it. You've seen, dinosaur eggs, and you've seen all this other stuff. You might be surprised to know that up until 2019, this year, we don't have any recorded discovery of a dinosaur by an average human being that was minding their own business, just walking by, tripped over something, looked back, and it was the spine of a dinosaur. The closest thing they have to an average pedestrian finding a dinosaur is a professional paleontologist or someone related to the business, someone who can make a profit from it, going up to a pedestrian, like a farmer typically, and saying, I bet if you dig here, you'll find a dinosaur. And wouldn't you know it? Pow. They dig there and they find a dinosaur. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found by, a 14-year-old kid? Now, I think those are probably bunk, but whatever. They existed. This kid found it. I believe it was a woman riding a donkey in Egypt who had the donkey leg fall through this hole. When they looked down inside the hole, they found the first of many caverns underneath the soil where literally tens of thousands of Romans were buried, according to Egyptian ritual, inside tombs in Egypt. I actually saw a few of these when I went to the London Museum back in 2001. Or no, 2000, excuse me. They just arrived. I just read about them, having come out of my Egyptology phase. Actually, I was just ending it. And there they were. Unbelievable. So, the idea that someone's going to pull a hoax with 30,000 tombs, sarcophagi of some sort, is highly against, right? But the Romans did like the way that the Egyptians did embalming, so it makes sense. Well, I come from Kansas, where farmers are turning the soil of the entire state, it's probably a good 75-80% of all the topsoil in Kansas has been turned over by a plow, being pulled by an animal initially, then being turned over by a tractor. The other big hoax is that when they do find dinosaurs, there seems to be this weird strategic location. And then they will find thousands and thousands of bones. It's like all the dinosaurs just got together in one place and all decided to die. But again, paleontologists are usually the ones that find this. And keep in mind, this is big business. You've got museums that need to have attractions. You've got magazines that need to have articles that draw eyeballs. Now, there are several hundred claims of finding individual dinosaur bodies, but up until 2019, we haven't remotely ever found a complete dinosaur skeleton. It's always some partial skeleton. And technically speaking, you're supposed to have a license to dig up a dinosaur. Isn't that funny? If you need a license, then that creates a tracking device. So if you want to start digging up dinosaurs, you go get your license, and now you're on a registry. Well, if you're not part of some paleontology society, quite frankly, you may not get the license. But if you do, at least they're going to start asking you, just like when you use an electron microscope, you have to register everything you're looking for in an electron microscope so the government can keep tabs on how much you're discovering about how the world actually works. To give you an idea how lucrative this business is, I think there was a Tyrannosaurus Rex parts and pieces that someone had sculpted together, of course. And of course, they're trying to say that they're selling the original bones, but you never see the original bones, so how do you know? But one of them sold to a museum for $12 million. That's a lot of money, folks. But okay, so you've been to a history museum, or natural history museum, and you've seen dinosaurs all over these museums. So what am I talking about? They don't exist. You've seen them with your own eyes. Well, one, you don't always see full, dinosaurs. But most of the time they are full dinosaurs, right? From the tailbone all the way up to the legs, the rib cages, up to the head. They're almost always complete. There's more complete dinosaurs in any one of these natural history museums, but we've never found a complete skeleton. In fact, there's been claims they never really found a skull of anything. Now, since Eric Dubé dropped his video about 5 years ago talking about this, maybe it wasn't quite 5 years ago, but this theory's been out there for a while. Then all of a sudden, they said they found skulls. I think that's interesting. So for nearly 150 years, no skulls, then all of a sudden someone questions paleontology, and it's like, all right, we need to get these skulls out there. Okay, so I guess about 170 years. since they said they found the first tooth, right? So what are you seeing in the museums? Well, let's say that you're a privileged kid, you're rich, and you've been to every natural history museum in the world. You have walked through every single museum that has shown a dinosaur on some, steel structure. I will tell you that even if you've been to all of them, you've never seen a real dinosaur bone in your life. Because every single thing that you've ever seen is a plaster conglomeration of all kinds of different things to form what they say officially is a facsimile of the real bone. So the real bone is somewhere in a vault, and they have done a plaster technique, and they've cast these things that you see. That way, if someone comes in with the baseball bat, you don't have any problems, right? You might be shocked to find out that, they've had dinosaurs around forever, like the Brontosaurus, and they realized they said that they had the wrong head on the wrong dinosaur for like 100 some years. It's hilarious. So you've never seen one. So the whole thing is a fabrication to begin with. It's kind of like going to a museum of Charles Dickens and you start seeing all of his fictional characters everywhere in wax and thinking that you're actually there and you've actually seen proof that Charles Dickens' stories were actually real because there was a facsimile in front of you to prove that it was real. Now, just to, recap here, as quickly as these paleontologists and people with the dig up dinosaur license find dinosaurs, man would have found tens of thousands of these things throughout time. And I know what someone's thinking. They're thinking, man may have discovered these things and simply couldn't recognize what they were. Right. Let's do some quick math here. How many of you go out and kill a wild animal, lynch it up onto a tree, which is where the word was invented, cut it from its crotch all the way to its neck, gut out the bag, and then slowly slice off all of the skin, because we're going to keep the fur, we're going to keep everything, and we're going to eat it or turn it into some utility? How many of us do that every single day so that we can eat meat? I'm going to guess very few of you. Maybe if some of you are Ted Nugent, and I know some of you guys hunt, hats off to you dudes and dudettes. But most people on Earth have no clue what the inside of an animal looks like, and especially do not have, unless they're artists who are studying this for the sake of replication, you don't know what a femur bone looks like, a tooth, a skull. If you saw a skull in the desert, you may not know whether or not it's a bison, a cow, or a boar. But back in the day, they absolutely knew what everything was, because they were constantly tearing apart an animal to eat it and use it. How many of you have heard the stories of the Native Americans and how they absolutely used every single piece of a buffalo, bison, everything? The teeth were cut out to be ornamental. The furs were definitely used. They turned the beef either into immediate food or beef jerky. They had contests where they would eat the intestines, stringing them all the way out, and two dudes, one side, one's on line A, one's on line B, and they'd eat this intestine and run, and whoever could eat the most intestine would win the contest. You should grow up in the Midwest. You'll find out these things. When you grow up in the big city, they make you feel like everybody's a fucking moron. Not the case. So we should have been discovering these things when we dig out enough rock to build the pyramids, the couple hundred that exist in Egypt alone. Just because 3 in the Giza Plateau are really popular doesn't mean those are the only ones that are made. There are dozens and dozens of bent pyramids, dozens of pyramids that are as big as mountains, but they've cannibalized them for other resources. The pyramids in Mexico alone, in South America, are monstrously gigantic. They're mountains but they're man-made. Yeah, they might have like a dirt core, but they were geometric. We have pyramids in China, pyramids in South Africa, pyramids in Turkey. They're all over the place. We would have discovered gigantic bones, and they would have been on display, and they probably, just like World of Warcraft, would have been used to build huts, right? Got a big giant femur bone the size of this pole over here. Well, instead of putting the pole, I put the femur bone there, and I'd bring in the other rival chieftain, and I'd say, look at this place. We killed these animals, and now we're using their bones to build our hut. You gonna mess with me? You don't even compare to these femur bones. Imagine how big this creature was. I'd tell a big story about how big it was. I'd have teeth around my neck this big, 6-inch teeth. But now, are these all fake? Or everything that they're claiming to have found complete fakes? Well, it's pretty hard to fake a tooth, probably. It's a very specific thing. It's not going to be like an arrowhead that came off of a rock necessarily. A big giant femur bone? Well, we have creatures like woolly mammoths. We're pretty sure they were just big elephants, right? So some of these things could be real as long as they're close to the evolutionary history that we see today. And evolution, you can take it with a grain of salt. I'm not talking about evolution back to us supposedly climbing out of trees as monkeys, or some fish that gains legs and becomes landbound and then turns into a giraffe, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about species in general. You can look again at the mantis insect and find out that there are, God was having a blast creating these little Lamborghini insects, But you could find a bunch of bones in various states and then choose to take, a saber-toothed tiger claw or a big giant bear claw. Because there are big giant bears, we just don't always find them, right? But if a bear's been out there for 60 years and gets absolutely massive, and then he dies and his bones are there, you take the claw off that one, the bone off this one, that one, and you could literally hodgepodge together a monster. Hollywood's been doing it for years. Any of you have seen John Carpenter's The Thing? I think they used 32 cows to create the various incarnations of the alien. Then, I won't ruin the movie for you, but there's an animal that turns into this being, and then they just keep using cow parts and burning them to give them this certain look. Utterly brilliant. But that's fake. If you pay attention to the acceleration or the velocity of discovery from paleontology, once this 1842 theory was hit in the paper. And the funny thing is, I know the son of one of the most famous Royal Society paleontologists on planet Earth. I think the dude was even knighted at one point, his father. But it seemed like there was an amazing haste to get this theory out there, to crush anything that was creationism, to crush the paradigm of a supreme being creating things, or having any participation whatsoever. Everything had to be knocked down to a level where it was just incidental. Again, this kind of something from nothing theory, if you start back at the Big Bang. Now, for those of you who are religious, they do get into this notion that, if dinosaurs came before man, then man is essentially an afterthought of dinosaurs. A guy went first with dinosaurs, got tired, and then obviously sent a meteor down, poof, which is probably not a meteor, it's probably a gigantic volcanic explosion. And then we have this extinction event. You hear it all the time, and it's there for you to repeat so that you feel extremely smart, just like the ludicrous Big Bang Theory, which relies on a theory of gravity, which in Wikipedia to this day is considered a phenomenon. You don't get the Big Bang or black holes if you go with the traditional theory of gravity, which is a particle attracts another particle by exchanging information. That exchange of information never occurs, which is why they've never been able to prove it, which is why the theory is still a phenomenon. Switch back to ethereal theories of gravity, kaboom, everything makes sense. You therefore can't have black holes, and you most certainly can't create a singularity. Now, if you think still I'm crazy, and I'm being ludicrous with this whole thing, you might find it interesting that there are two companies on planet Earth, one in China, one in Canada, that make dinosaur bones. They take a bunch of bones from a bunch of random creatures and melt it down, put a bunch of adhesives into it, and then you can pour it into molds. And if you do samples of it, it's a bone. But if you do genetic tests on it, you're going to find out it's not a dinosaur. It's a chicken bone, and one little particle, it's a turkey bone. Another one, it's a cow on another particle. But what is fossilization? How does that whole thing occur? Well, this gets into the ability to say it's organic, and this gets into the ability to date its existence. The way this works in the petrified forest, when you see petrified trees, because that's true fossilization, it is a very, very specific situation that occurs where you have some still water that is undisturbed for the most part for a very long time. How long, who knows? But as a particular infinitesimal organic molecule begins to disintegrate, in this water are little sedimentary rocks which can go in, and they're at the exact same scale. They go in and they replace that organic component, because rock over a long period of time will definitely bind with other rock. You start to replace organic matter with rock. Again, the petrified forest is the only place I know where we can say this absolutely occurs. I do have fossils in my house of trilobites and other things that seem very plausible, because we still have those beings in a different name on Earth. So there's a technique called the radiometric effect, where they are supposedly dating these bones / rocks, okay, and figuring out how old everything is. And so they'll tell you straight out, oh, this one's 100 million years old, this is 400 million years old, blah, blah, blah. What you might be surprised to find out is that they're not actually using the radiometric effect on the actual found bones, but on typically neighboring rocks in the area. Well, the radiometric effect of dating things has almost been completely dismissed as a valid methodology of figuring out how old something is. One of the paleontologists said, I couldn't tell the difference between a dinosaur egg and a rock. And the real reason was because they were submitting rocks as dinosaur eggs. Isn't that hilarious? So any type of attempt to date these bones is pure guesswork. Any attempt to try and take a bone from one location and match it with the bone of another location, that's also guesswork. But there's another element to this that you can just use without knowing any of this advanced post-1842 theory / discovery, and that has to do with the physics of these dinosaurs. Haven't you ever thought it looked really strange for a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which has a pair of pretty strong legs, has no front arms really, small hands, but its gut sac and most of its spinal cord, plus its massive skull, which is going to have tremendous amounts of fluid. Remember, I think the human skull is like 1/7 the weight of your body or something like that. I probably have that wrong, but it's a significant portion of your overall weight as a human being, and it's because it has a lot of dense bone in it, a dense matter, and it also has water, lots of water. Okay, our chest cavity is doing pretty good, but it has 2 big lungs in it which have air in it. So if you're to make a Tyrannosaurus Rex do what it's supposed to do, it would have to have a counterbalancing tail behind it to offset its weight. It doesn't work out. Some of these theorized gigantic brontosauruses and other giant creatures, technically speaking, they would weigh so much that even if you were to make the bone out of bone material, they would crush their own legs because they would weigh too much. Consequently, they would probably move extremely slow. Even the Tyrannosaurus Rex would move super slow, because once you start moving that kind of mass and crunching it, they'd probably break their own bones. However, if you believe in expanding Earth, Neil Adams does present the theory that if we do reverse the world's history and get rid of all the oceans and make all the continents connect on all sides, which is what happens, you would have an Earth about 1/4 the gravity, and therefore maybe that issue I'm mentioning isn't a big deal. But you're also talking about a Earth that doesn't have a lot of lush foliage everywhere, so the idea that these beings would have enough food to survive is the next big problem. The amount of food that any one of the theorized dinosaurs would have to eat would be so massive that, especially with their small heads, take a brontosaurus, right? The old Monty Python skit about the brontosaurus. It's thin at one end, much bigger in the middle, and thin at the other end. That is my theory. Okay. So you have this gut sack of a brontosaurus that is unquestionably about the size of a normal house in America. Probably 1,000 square feet minimum. But what do you have? You have this little tiny neck that goes way, way, way out. Okay? And has a little tiny bird skull at the end. Because they used to use bird skulls as the template when the artist would carve a fake skull for 150 years, if not 170 years, to give the thing a head. And so they just make it up. They put horns on them and all kinds of wild, Jesus lizard-looking things, all in bone form. Your Triceratops. But this little tiny mouth is going to have to eat metric tons of food every single day to feed that big giant house that is the rest of the body. It would be an utter 24-hour marathon for a brontosaurus to eat enough mass to stay alive. And it's a vegetarian because it doesn't have the jowls and the pointy teeth to become anything other than a vegetarian based on this bird skull that they use. Of course, it's all made up in the first place, right? So that's an impossibility. We know on Earth that if you let loose a whole, I don't even know what they call it, like a herd of sheep or goats or cattle, they will literally eat everything off your land, and you got to rotate them, and you better have the right amount of acreage that is ready to be consumed for a particular size of herd. Otherwise, they're going to eat all the food and then starve to death because they won't have enough to rotate. So the world's supposedly so saturated with dinosaurs that, again, on one particular site, you will have someone claiming to find 2,000 to 6,000 distinct dinosaur bones from different dinosaurs, not just one that's been blown apart, right? But what are the odds that you find these perfect areas where you find partial skeletons, never a full skeleton? Now, they've been getting a little bit better because I think that they're starting to, pardon the pun, collapse under the pressure of their own bullshit, so that, you will see some pretty impressive, skeletons where you see the vertebrae that goes on for, 12 feet, and these guys are digging it out. Some of you will be very familiar with the notion that they say that birds are the descendants of dinosaurs, and then, coincidentally, within a few square miles of the company in China that makes these dinosaur bones for a living and brags about the fact that they are in, 60 different countries, they've made tens of thousands of these bones to be discovered. They'll literally come to your land and push one into a mountainside and then cover it up. And then you can go out as paleontologists and discover it and then dig it out. But it's all artificial. That's above board. But it was right around this company in China that they found supposedly dinosaurs with feathers. And it went all over the press, right? It was, again, magazines sold, specials went on TV. And because 3D rendering software gets so amazing, the dinosaurs inside of our fictional computers are so realistic and convincing that if you see it on TV, people think it's actually real. That's how this whole thing has forged itself. And boy, if you're willing to believe one giant hoax, Can't you believe another hoax? And the very, very interesting thing is that we have religions that have less evidence than dinosaurs. And they're believed too. So they build up your brain to be able to accept things that you want to be true, even though they have no truth at all. No evidence at all. I mean, zero evidence for religion, right? But all of a sudden, they push a few bones together that don't belong together, and you not only believe in dinosaurs, but you believe in the scientific theory that would have made them in the first place, which is evolution. Now, let's say evolution really is the way it worked. Making up dinosaurs to somehow further your agenda of this Darwinism evolution, and then later getting caught in the 21st century of having forged all these creatures together, and you never show the bones, and they're all plastic, and you've synthesized 80% of the structure of any one of these creatures, and then you push them into television and books like Danny and the Dinosaur when I was a kid. But you get caught, and now you're setting back your movement, who knows, 500 years, 1,000 years, until some other piece of true evidence comes around where we can say, oh, now we figured out how that works. I mean, if we could ever get that Star Trek computer to really be able to predict how protein patterns tell double helixes how to create themselves, if we could ever do that cause and effect thing, then we could actually prove it in a computer. We're not there yet, unfortunately. Maybe quantum computing can help us out with that. But the feathered dinosaurs were heavily dismissed once the evidence was really examined. So, hats off to some of these paleontologists for actually coming out and saying, you know, I went into this and I dropped out either before they graduated because as they took all of what they were taught and brought it into the laboratory and tried to prove it, or they tried to get access to these bones and were told they're behind vaults, they had the guts to not ruin their lives in this fake career, which they probably could have made a lot of money, but they have integrity and they pull out. Paleontologists, again, that have been in the business for over 30 years, being denied access to these bones behind these special vaults, they pull out. But because we now know how the Chinese have brilliantly done this, and I guess the Canadians do the same thing, but melting down bones. It doesn't make any sense because fossilized bones should be technically rock. But if you did see something on the internet that looked like a big giant bone, I mean, any shape you can imagine, they just build a mold, pour this junk in there, close the mold, you got a fake bone. They even talk about in the Chinese company that they'll put, artificial fractures in the bones. They'll do all kinds of stuff to make the bone look real. But it's fake, 100% fake. In 1999, National Geographic, this will blow your mind. National Geographic announced the Archaeoraptor. I believe I'm saying that correctly. Raptor. When did that get popular? Oh, the Raptor became popular in 1993 when Steven Spielberg made the Raptor the center character of his movie Jurassic Park, which is based on a Michael Crichton novel. He also pissed off paleontologists by making a brontosaurus stand up on its hind legs in the first shot and then do this, leap forward. Because by 1993, paleontologists have been saying, look, you can't have a brontosaurus lift its head because it doesn't have enough blood pressure to push blood all the way up that giant neck and keep its consciousness. So it always has to be below the heart that's in that center house of the middle of his body. So I thought that was interesting. At least they're starting to look at the physics a little bit better. But that has to stop as quickly as possible. But they took some of this Archaeoraptor material and put it under a CT scanner and figured out it was BS. And then they had to come out and say that they had lied, that they had invented a fake dinosaur. How many people ever get a chance to read the retraction in a newspaper or a retraction in a magazine? I mean, geez, if a television, let's say the History Channel or Discovery does some special on a Archaeoraptor, And they publicize this whole thing. The only thing that they will do is not run that special again, because the creature's been proved to be a fake. But they'll never go back and run a special to say, sorry, we fed your kids a bunch of crap that now they believe. But I want you to think about the money behind this whole thing, because when you want to think about why something exists, I would say it's probably safe to estimate that the Royal Society of England, or of London, I'm not sure what the last word is, but when they put this paper forward in 1842, they're trying to advance the agenda of evolution. It's a big deal. It's going to be a big business, right? And let me give you a little algorithm here of why that would be the case. What if you had, let's see, 4 colleges, let's just say, in the modern time? We've got Caltech and MIT in America, and we have Cambridge and Oxford in England. So the 4 of the top colleges in the world, and they're science colleges. Now, for a while there, each one of the colleges are probably known for being more advanced in one particular area than the other college. And for maybe 100, 200 years, that's the case. But here comes the internet. And the internet is balancing knowledge. So you have the 4 colleges start to have as much quantum physics as the other college. One of them has aerospace initially as their thing, and then it starts to balance out in all the other colleges. Well, you're going to need some competitive subject matter where your college starts to become more powerful than another college, at least for the next game, the next 100 years or 50 years. Therefore, when someone's determining what tuition they're going to pay for from which college, you can't get paleontology from, say, 3 out of the 4 because they haven't endorsed this new theory. So right at that onset, you'll have colleges that will outperform each other because of theories that they've advanced. Remember, Stephen W. Hawking was a Cambridge University guy. He eventually started holding the position that Isaac Newton held at Cambridge, and his whole thing was the Big Bang for a very long time. They don't want anything to dismiss the Big Bang. I mean, if you listen to my show and you study ethereal sciences, you'll find out the Big Bang absolutely positively can have occurred. And then all of that assertion from Cambridge becomes fraudulent, becomes almost comical. You could go into the admission board with all the head scientists that believe in the Big Bang, present your case of ethereal sciences, destroy their theory, and say, so, you're a college that teaches pseudoscience. That is your huge claim to fame. And you're unwilling to acknowledge ethereal winds, ethereal technology, which provided Tesla everything that he used to make all of his instruments, which is what's running the world. Wireless technology, Tesla. Alternating current, Tesla. He was going to transmit again, free power to everyone's house, right? Now, let's talk about the phenomenon of our sort of loyalties to belief systems. And it's funny because there are tons of examples of this in 2019, where you've been taught something your entire life, and then all of a sudden there's a group that's now questioning the very validity of things that have been sort of common knowledge for a really long time. Common knowledge with a little asterisk over it. And the asterisk down by the bottom says, we really don't have any proof of this. It's probably complete bullshit, but we make a ton of money off of it. Thank you for listening. We believe, there's a giant portion of people on Earth that believe that our Creator, at one point, was so flawed in his design of the Earth, and so flawed in the design of man, that he had to send his own son, his only son. He only had one son, right? God only has one of these things. And he sends it down on a woman who's a virgin, gets her pregnant. She gives birth. This kid's a prodigy. He lives about 30 years before he really activates his mutant gene. And then he runs around for 3 years. Ends up getting killed on the Mason 33 degree year of his life. Should give you some clues there where that story came from. We used to sacrifice lambs for our sins, and because God made a mistake, right? He's, oh, poor lambs, gosh, let me send my son down, he can die for your sins, and then everything will be great. Now, you'd have to overlook the fact that he's probably the 27th Messiah of that exact archetype to come down. Now, his individual story differs from the previous 27 in several ways, but in a lot of cases, Jesus as a young man taking, audience of the rabbis and of the priests of the time and demonstrating that he has divine knowledge of all of their laws, that was repeated in several predecessors. But most of Jesus' life is modeled after Titus Flavius, the Caesar that founded Rome in the modern era, right? Created the Colosseum, created the arenas, created the aqueducts. This guy was the bomb. They wanted you to worship him, at least in symbolic metaphor and typology. So Titus Flavius' life is all in stone. Jesus' life isn't remotely documented till probably 350 AD. And then it evolved over time. But his story starts to mock Titus Flavius' life. There's 45 correlations between Titus Flavius' life and Jesus' life. In the end, you are worshiping Titus Flavius through the story of Christ. The story of the Big Bang. As I've said several times on the show, go study Joseph Campbell, who really locked down the mythos of modern man, meaning all the stories we told to ourselves to explain the universe. They said God woke up, and when God woke up, he exploded, and his body flew all over the universe, and every life force that exists in the universe is a particle of God that landed on pre-existing planets that orbited pre-existing suns with pre-existing moons. But then people heard the story and said, well, then, chicken and egg problem here. Where did those planets, stars, and moons come from? So they re-edited the story of the creation of the universe. This is so funny. This is God's nature. Man's nature, right? They said, well, those came out of God's bosom as well. Those are like, gold stones and kidney stones that just happen to have no use. Okay. Fast forward, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years, maybe 100,000 years, and you have scientists starting to try and make this true using this phenomenon definition of gravity. But then we wake up and we find out that's all crap. It doesn't make any sense. Something from nothing? Really? You got nothing? And then all of a sudden everything comes out of it. My God. How an atheist wouldn't believe in God, I don't know, because that creates a miracle right there. If you believe that crap, none of it's true. Now, are there explosions in space that are gigantic? Sure. If it exists, yes, sure. Makes sense. Ethereal winds will compress mass up to a certain point. There you go. At sea level, you get bubbles in water. 7 miles down, you can crush an I-beam in the ocean. Ether's like water, so you get more water, you get more density, more ether, you get more density, boom, you got an issue. Those of you that think that gravity is buoyancy and pressure, well, you're kind of right. You just got to understand it's an invisible particle that you can't see that moves 50 times the speed of light. Which I just watched a Star Trek episode last night that had, it's a season 6 Star Trek episode, Next Generation, and they end up running through some temporal anomalies in space. It's actually a super, super cool, deep thinking episode where I'll just say this, they end up, they're in a shuttlecraft. You've got Data, Counselor Troy, Geordi, and Captain Picard in this shuttlecraft. They've been on some visitation to some conference, and now they're flying back to the coordinates where the Enterprise exists. And when they get there, they find out it's frozen in time. There's a warbird there, it's a Romulan ship, and there seems to be they seem to be attacking each other is what this seems to be, and time is frozen. But what they find out is that there's these anomalies where things move 50 times the speed of normal time. which I thought was interesting because that's the constant that Faraday, Tesla, and Eric Dollard found ether to move 50 times the speed of light. Just thought that was interesting. But we're raised with this stuff. And as I said a long time ago in my episode, Why Do We Believe? What is your genetic capability or probability in divorcing yourself from a belief system that you were raised with? Ask anybody who's pursuing the flat earth movement. If they are talking to someone across the table who's never heard that theory before, they are dealing with the genetic predisposition to believe in the other theory, which is heliocentric ball earth. But how many other theories are based on the theory of the dinosaurs? Well, they tell you that, there's these pterodactyls that could fly, which, they don't remotely match the genetic design of a bat, let alone a bird. Again, because the skulls are all faked, you get these bizarre looking creatures. I mean, they put a lot of effort into making these things look distinct. But if you go to a museum and you see these brown looking things that look like bones, you're going to think you're seeing the real deal. It's false advertising. And imagine that someone took your money for a natural history museum and they're showing you fraudulent material as a result of your ticket, but selling you the notion that you actually saw something that was real. Sounds like you could get your money back as long as you can prove it's fake. Or challenge them to say, I don't think any of this is real. I want my money back. And the only way you're ever going to keep my money is to take me to those vaults that you won't let 35-year professional paleontologists see. Wouldn't that be interesting? The method of getting to see the real bones would be a class action lawsuit against all these museums. But what's the risk of seeing what they call bones? Well, you could find out they're not real. Just like National Geographic having to eat their tail with this Archaeoraptor, take those bones and put them under CT scans, take them and try to figure out whether or not they're fraudulent or not. Again, what is it? Cope and Marsh said they found 136 individual dinosaurs, and today they're only acknowledging 32 of them as real, even in their own science. And, about 2 years ago, when this thing was super duper hot, there was a case where I believe there was a company in Utah that supposedly found what they said were dinosaur bones. And this Christian church called them up, and the phone call is actually on YouTube. And what the claim was is that they actually found bone marrow of a dinosaur, which is ludicrous, right? Hundreds of millions of years, ain't no bone marrow that's going to survive, let alone bone in particular, right? But they claim they had this bone marrow, if I have the story right, because I remember listening to the phone call. And the dude calls up, and he doesn't identify himself as part of this church, but the dude who answered the call knew that this was something that was potentially going to happen to him. And he said, you know what? I represent an organization, this is the guy making the phone call, and he said, we will pay for all of the tests that need to occur on your bones that you said you found to prove that they are indeed dinosaur bones, that they are indeed hundreds of millions of years old. And the guy immediately starts to abort the phone call verbally and says, I know who you are, and we don't want your money because I know that you have an ulterior motive. And the guy said, well, what are you talking about? What would that matter? I'm actually giving you the money so that you can prove what you have already claimed, that these are dinosaur bones. But the guy refused because he knows if it ever got that formal level of testing, they'd be done. Be one more hoax out there, and then that guy's organization who has these fraudulent, dinosaur bones, which are probably normal bones, I would guess, would be out of business and they would lose their reputation So, of course, the guy is going to refuse any financial aid to prove his own theory that he claims is true. And let me give you a fictional analogy that overlays that exact situation so we can take it another step. Let's say that, and this is all fictional, so don't quote me as this is what he said and it was real. I'll give you a little sci-fi movie plot. Your family is like the Donald Trump family, where his uncle went and was the first guy that grabbed all of Tesla's, inventions after he died in New York. That's a true story. He's one of the head physicists at MIT, and they thought he was the most qualified guy to pick this information up. And there's a funny little theory online that Tesla was actually trying to master time travel, because when he did his experiment in Springfield, Colorado, and surrounded himself in this bolt of lightning he got out of the ground for free and modulated up, that he said his assistant, who walked towards him to cut the circuit, because this thing just infinitely kept pulling out plasma from the Earth's core. In his estimation, he said, time slowed down, or time sped up for me so that my assistant looked like he was moving really slow. And that gave him the notion that through electromagnetism, you could actually control space-time. That's a true story. His claim and his impression of what he was dealing with. Now, whether or not Tesla ever invented anything that travels through time, who knows, right? But let's say that did happen, and you're part of that family, you're part of the Trump family, and you've got a time travel machine. And you're like, look, it's perfect. It totally works. We've been all over history. It's great. Now, you go to Cambridge University, and they go up to these scholars of Cambridge University, and they say, okay, you can do this two different ways. You can go up to the Royal Society of England and say, we're going to take a video camera with its own power supply, and we're going to send it back in time to when you say dinosaurs were here, and we're going to videotape the whole set. We got a drone that's hooked to it. It's going to fly. Where do you think dinosaurs were really? You say you had one pit that had 6,000 distinct bones. Let's roll back and we'll just videotape. We'll make the machine jump through time a little bit. And they don't believe you. And of course, you show a demonstration of your time machine, and oh my God, it's real. They realize you're not lying. What do you think the odds are that they're going to take you up on your offer? They're not going to do it, because there won't be any dinosaurs there. They go to the Vatican and they say, okay, you say Jesus Christ was real. Where was he crucified again? Oh, right over there? Okay, we're going to take this camera back. It's got a stealth device so no one can see it, and it's going to drone around completely silent and videotape all of Rome at 0 AD and maybe 33 years back, and try to find this guy from Nazareth who claims he's the Son of God. We're going to try to find the disciples. We're going to try to find all these miracles. Once we find the dude, we're going to track him and just film everything that he's ever done. We're going to see him walk on water, cast demons into pigs that then drown themselves in a pond, cure lepers, all this stuff. You think the Vatican would take him up on that offer? The answer is no, because they will lose all of their extortion power for man. The idea that God rigged the world such that flawed man has to go through flawed man to get salvation, to be with God, all of a sudden doesn't look like a very logical solution to the universe. So is the belief in dinosaurs going to diminish over the coming decades? I would not place that bet for quite a while. If the Earth undergoes a giant reset, and not the kind that the ruling powers would want to see, which is a 98.9% reduction in population, but if we ever got truth to be really, really popular, it's going to be a very sobering century if we, say, spend 30 to 50 years revealing all of these lies, because a lot of people's religious systems will disappear. And then man might rediscover something about himself that is sort of what my screenwriting teacher tells me, which is man needs fiction. We need to create art that imitates life in a way that is like Gene Roddenberry creating the Star Trek universe. I have an episode on Star Trek. I don't remember what season it's in. I think it's in either 1 or 2. But in that episode, I say, look, yeah, if education ever became a priority on this earth, and if what we taught ourselves was actually true and not false, we could eventually ascend to the level of the human beings in the Gene Roddenberry universe, and then you could get rid of money, you could create a socialistic society, and everything could be great. But that's several thousand years from now, if we started today. I am no longer convinced that dinosaurs existed. And the number one reasons, this is plural, that I don't believe in dinosaurs at this point in my life is the method by which the theory was hatched, the method by which the first 136 supposed individual species of dinosaurs were discovered, and the fact that I've studied enough about human history, especially as it deals with monolithic structures, to know that man would have discovered these things a long time ago. Native Americans are very interesting in that they worshipped the earth, and they are probably one of the only cultures that I am aware of, and / races that I am aware of, that beat all man in one realization, and that is that earth is a living being that needed to be treated like a living being, that needed to be manicured and prized over anything else, because without earth there is no man. And it's interesting to note that when we found a Native American here in North America, even in the 1490s, they hadn't discovered the wheel yet. And part of that's because they had managed to build a balanced society that didn't need the wheel. They had sleds. They just didn't need it. They didn't need monolithic structures to intimidate each other or to prove that they were, worthy of being on this planet. They just lived. Some of them lived in one area the whole time. The Shoshone Indians went in this big giant circle with the seasons. So when it was really hot, they went north. When it was really cold, they went south. They ate berries in one season, animals in another season. They were amazingly balanced with nature. But they did excavate caves that they lived in. Remember the city that was made of gold? That they told the conquistadors that there was a city made of gold. So the conquistadors kept looking for it, because their goal is to take the gold and bring it back to the Queen of Spain, and then get rewarded for their exploration and acquisition of gold. And what they ended up finding was it was a mountainside that had been dug out. It still exists to this day. I forget its name. But when the sun shined on it at a particular time of day, it glistened like gold. It was a metaphor. It's amazing anyone translated the language up to that point, so someone could say, gold? Gold? What is gold? Oh, this right here. Oh, yeah, we got a city made of gold. Oh, really? That was probably the worst thing they could have told the conquistadors. But let me finish off this episode with kind of a generic statement. When I realized, and I don't know when I realized this, probably in my mid-30s, that when we build up a motor inside of our brain that can process information incorrectly, we then become sort of addicted to that methodology. There is sort of a supply and demand in the neurology of your brain to create these fictional realities. Why do you think kids get totally obsessed on Jap anime or Marvel heroes or Dungeons and Dragons or the millions of video games that are out there? They live these games, and I mean live them. Go watch a BlizzCon conference here in Anaheim and watch how the kids cry when a fictional hero gets killed or the story narrative and the lore gets mixed up and they make a mistake. They get all angry and butthurt and scream and yell at the microphone. It's because these fictional constructs have become their artificial reality to deal with the fact that their unattended reality is not what they want. So instead of going and developing goals that would make them truly happy with what's capable of being created on Earth, they run off on these fictional constructs, but then when reality creeps in, they absolutely freak out. And so, scientifically, they become sociopaths because nothing in reality appeals to them. As they become more and more incompatible with, I would say, human beings that acknowledge reality for what it is, they start to reject those individuals, and this is why we have so many snowflakes in the world and so many people that today are using their political affiliation as a rationale to join terrorist organizations that hurt people in public. If you don't like the way that's happening and the way that that works, I think the very first thing that you need to do is obviously check yourself. How much of that stuff do you believe? As much as there's probably dozens and dozens of you that are perhaps not receptive to my stories of how Christ came to exist, I have to maintain my own integrity with you based on really not a tremendous amount of research. I would say it's a lot of research, but not a tremendous amount of research. Go study Dr. Atwell, and you'll get the whole story of Christ down. But now, fiction does have its value, because let's say you lived in a world that was very tyrannical. We lost control. The Agenda 21 takes off. All right, you got a bunch of problems on your hands. Well, now, if you just acknowledge reality, we've all succumbed to a world with no freedoms, no individuality. We're living in these concentration camps called communities, which are not communities like we would define them, but as the elite would define them. Most of the population has been erased off the face of the planet. You don't have to get permission to do anything. All right, how would you dig yourself out? Well, someone's going to have to rebirth the notion of freedom, of inalienable rights that you deserve as a human being. And then you're going to have to use that art, because that's all it would be at that point, because it wouldn't exist in the real world. You'd have to have that idea, that imagination of, my God, I do deserve certain things because I exist, and you shouldn't be able to kill me, Robot Cop from THX 1138, because I deserve to live. You shouldn't be able to steal my stuff because you want it. Remember the movie Rollerball from 75? They would take his girlfriends and circulate them through the executives, because the executives wanted to sleep with the woman that had been with the rollerballer. That he would never be able to have a wife because they kept stealing his chicks. And his original wife did leave him for legitimate reasons, which you'll find out in the movie. But I really want us to get to a point as human beings where we can just simply take from these metaphors and take from these stories, take from art what is valuable to our person, and then leave the rest of our belief system up there on the shelf as, this is who I used to be. I used to believe in this as reality. Now I've come to grips with the fact that it's probably just man trying to help man through metaphor, and you become a better person because you start to become a real person. You can still live by, let's take 3 ridiculous characters out of 3 Amigos, right? It's Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short playing 3 actors who play these fictitious characters called the 3 Amigos, but they were mistaken for being real by a little village in Mexico who sent them a telegram saying they were going to put on a show and get rid of El Guapo. They think they're going down to do a fictional show because they think that this village is great big fans of theirs, but they go down and find out that this is real and that this village thinks that they're real. And what ends up happening? This is a beautiful little story. They have to become the real 3 Amigos. They have to really go up against this fictional character, El Guapo, and they have to teach the village how to defend themselves. And so what went from a fictional story becomes real, and then they free themselves from the tyranny of this character that was terrorizing them once every week or whatever, right? Stealing their women, stealing their food, their liquor, all that stuff. I don't know about you, but I would much rather be the real 3 Amigos than the fake 3 Amigos. To look in the mirror and say, well, for better or for worse, whatever I am, it's real. Story of Christ, I mention him all the time. I will talk about Christ as if he's completely real with my friends, because what I'm trying to do is pick out a story of his life that has value at the moment we're talking. The solution in the Bible that he might suggest is a solution for all of us. We just have to do it. Does he have to be real for that story and that advice to be powerful to us? No, not at all. You know, and I'll just close with this one. There have been situations in history where someone forged data and got an award for breaking a record. There's a bunch of these. And then someone else legitimately broke that record without cheating. And it's amazing when that happens, right? So they were lured by some fake piece of information, but then they conquer it for real. I think that's awesome. So dinosaurs, currently in my book, they are now a fictional construct. Does it matter? Not really. Whether or not we believe in these things until the end of mankind, or we figure out that they weren't real, I don't know about you, but there's nothing in my life on a daily basis that changes because these things are real or fake. Now, what I forgot to mention earlier was that the existence of oil as a fossil fuel was attached to dinosaurs and the time of dinosaurs. Again, when I was a kid, they used to flat up tell you that crude oil was melted down dinosaurs. When they finally figured out there weren't enough dinosaurs on the planet, even in their fictitious theory, to account for all of the oil that continually fills up oil wells, they blamed it on the organic life, like ferns and trees and things that also melted down into crude oil. And then when we found out that crude oil exists as far down as we can dig, right? Russians have been down 8 miles and found oil. And all life stops at about 3 miles, meaning no fossils, no organic mass beyond 16,000 feet. Then they have a huge problem and they just want to get rid of the conversation, because oil is a natural byproduct of the Earth's interior. It is not a fossil fuel, and it's not limited. And again, I'll warn everybody, this will be a funny prophecy for maybe 20 years from now, 30 years from now. We do find replacements for oil. When we stop drilling oil is going to start floating on the surface of the Earth again. Not in any giant ocean or something like that, but southern Texas is going to have oil fields where it's just sedimentary crude oil on top of the soil. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. At the same time, we're using this new engine that doesn't have to use any oil whatsoever. So I think that's a funny little reality check that's gonna nip us in the butt. B-U-T-T this time. So anyway, that's all I've got on that one, but this is one I've been wanting to do for a very long time. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you, because there's videos out there that claim to debunk this, but man, when you listen to them, it is all just conjecture, right? It's like someone, I don't know, using their belief system to continually perpetuate the belief instead of using science. Until there's an exhibit with fully independently verified bones / fossilized rocks of organic matter by independent, non-affiliated paleontologists, researchers, or just scientists that are saying, look, we understand your theory of paleontology. We're gonna analyze all of this stuff behind your vaults. Until that is done and proven, 10 Ways to Sunday, where the human beings of this world like you and I can go and see it and see the whole theory of the whole thing from soup to nuts, it's fake. It's not real. Hopefully that doesn't disappoint too many people. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. That's where all the episodes exist. There are 2 feeds for video, which is YouTube and BitChute. BitChute is now completely up to date. There's 2 links for social media. There's 2 links for the audio, of course. Again, take your device that you want to listen to the podcast on, go to the website, click the link. It'll immediately link up with your software. You're good to go. We have a locked Facebook group with some of the coolest people on Earth. Twitter's there, but it's just the feed. It's just the links of the videos, just in case you want to retweet something somewhere. And for those of you who do, I really appreciate it. There's a few ways to donate to to the page, to the movement. One of them is PayPal, which because of BitChute, I've been getting a few contributions. And again, I want to say I don't have any identity of you folks going through PayPal. So you are anonymously contributing, so I really appreciate that. The other one is Patreon, where you can put in a monthly $1 or $2 or whatever you want. The cool thing about Patreon is that you guys get the feeds first. So when I make an episode, either when it's encoded or I'm still uploading it, I will post it on Patreon so that you get it, a few hours to even 4 or 5 days before everyone else, so you can get the feed right away. And for those of you who contribute, thank you very much. You're in the credits. If you ever do contribute through Patreon, or if I can find out who you are through PayPal, you will go in the credits permanently. So let's make the credits last like 4 or 5 minutes. The other two that I have for contribution is the Brave browser. You need to get this browser regardless if you get it from me. If you want to just get it and don't worry about an affiliate link from me, just go to Brave. I think it's brave.com. But it's a browser that is cutting off the deep state. They can't figure out where you are, who you are. Change your search engine inside there to DuckDuckGo instead of Google. They don't share your metrics. They don't track your metrics. And so you're completely anonymous the entire time you're searching on whatever the hell you want to search on. So it's a beautiful step. And that browser's getting super popular. So it's super fast because they cut off all the advertising, the videos that try to autoplay on your browser, and they cut off all the trackers. So if you go to Fox or CNN or some website, Amazon will run ads that you just looked up the Black & Decker, and all of a sudden what you search on Amazon's there. It cuts that off so that Amazon has no idea where you're going, which is beautiful. But the other one is Backblaze. It's a backup software. I'm going to say this a few times because, again, this thing saves my bacon. Anytime my computer has problems rebooting, I never worry anymore because this thing allows you to have 2 computers for $5 a month, 2 computers, infinite drives, and I think I have technically about 20 terabytes of information that's connected to my computers, whether it be my laptop or my desktop system, which is an iMac. And it's all backed up all night long. It takes a little while for the first one, but when you want to go get your files, you just surf your hard drives online, tell it what you want, it builds this compressed file, then you download their software to get it, and it does a beautiful job expanding it. They even recommend, I think it's called Better Zip, I think on the Mac. Windows does really well decompressing this, but they'll help you get everything done. It's great. Saved my bacon several times, so definitely get a copy of that. If you're looking for Season 1 episodes on this particular channel, you're not going to find them because I've marked them all unlisted. If they're embedded, they still work. Go to the website. There's a link for Season 1. It's a different channel on YouTube, all remastered. BitChute has all the remastered ones as well. But make it easy on yourself. Just go to deepthoughtsradio.com, click in the search field, type anything you want. Remember, there's category fields where you can click on them, and they bring up the page with all the moon episodes, all the dream episodes, anything you want's in there. That's all I've got for today. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.